Welcome back. You've found Fritz. Today marks the 6th video in the 2nd season of my creative series, where we look at the tools and techniques used to produce and otherwise create new original music. Today's installment focuses on bass production tools, which are used to add weight and consistency to the low end and sub frequencies of the bass guitar as a result of blending the live 4-string bass signal with a synth. We'll also touch on some EQ and compression maneuvers which aid in clarifying the bass in the overall mix. Using excerpts from our example song for this season called Bad Stuff, the goal in this context is to enlargen and separate the choruses from the verses and to translate the blended low-end signal to a broad range of playback systems. There's chapters below if you'd like to jump to something specific, but in summary, the tools that we'll go over to accomplish this are Sound Device Digital Subbass Doctor, Acustica Audio's Gold and Pink EQs paired with a more standard digital multi-band EQ, and Arturia's V collection. All of this is aside, of course, from my Fender bass sitting right behind me. Thank you very much for tuning in, and let's get started. Okay, so here's the session inside of Logic Pro. And for the sake of this video, not looking unnecessarily confusing and ridiculous, I'm going to take all the tracks that are grayed out, so all of these tracks, and I'm going to convert them to stereo tracks. So for instance, all of these tracks are guitars, and I'm going to make one stereo file to represent all of them. So after I did that, this is what we're looking at. Everything in blue is a group of tracks that's been converted to one stereo track. Everything in brown is the drums. Then the orange tracks represent one single bass line. So it was recorded all as one, as you can see here. But then I broke it up into 3 separate tracks because, for instance, in the verses, as opposed to the choruses, there was different processing going on, not least of which is using a synth in the chorus and the intro of the song to supplement the sub-low end and the low end frequencies. This is a commonly used technique in electronic and pop music, but today we're adapting that into a rock song with just a single synth and a bass. All right, so even though I've already done this, let's pretend like I've never made this MIDI track down here. So to convert audio to MIDI in Logic, what you want to do, let's just focus in on the beginning of this chorus. And I'm going to double click on it. And over here, this little icon that looks like a hourglass on its side, I'm going to click that. Turn on flex, and I have flex pitch selected. You can also do flex time, but that would be to fix mistakes in alignment. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say edit and create MIDI track from flex pitch data. And there it is. It's not that simple though. When it's done creating the MIDI track, it's going to automatically create a track with the default setting, and that's usually a piano. So I just put on the synth that we're going to use for this song, which I'll get to in a moment. But if we play it back, it follows the bass pretty well. But as you could hear there, it gets a little messed up. So it does require some editing to get exactly what you want. So let's get rid of this track and we'll focus on the one that I've already edited. I'll just get rid of all the plugins for a moment because we'll talk about those later. Since there's no plugins on either tracks, it's going to sound a little phasey. But as you can hear, I did some editing so that it really follows that bass guitar a little bit better. And if you've never edited MIDI in Logic, it's really easy. You just double click on the MIDI region and here's your editor. You can expand it and you just grab the handles on either side to shorten or lengthen each note. Super simple. So the reason for splitting up the chorus into the 4-string bass and a synthetic bass is because I want each of them to handle different frequency domains. The 4-string bass is going to handle the mid-range and the upper mid-range, and the synth bass is going to handle basically everything below 200 hertz. So that's going to be the low end and the sub frequencies. I'm introducing this technique in the choruses because I want to expand the low end of the bass guitar to areas that a normal 4-string bass can't hit consistently and accurately enough. So let's start by looking at the verse bass guitar. And this is what it sounds like with no plugins at all. Sun shines through the wrinkled arms of the trees. It's okay, but it's warm. It's too warm. So I want to brighten it up and make it more intelligible. So to do that, I got these two plugins by Acustica Audio. I have Gold, which is a Neve emulation, and Pink, which is an API emulation. And they're going to both be brightening up that middle to upper mid-range. So on the Neve, you have 1.8 as a good place to boost. And on the API, you have 800, which is great. And then a little bit at 2.5K and a little bit at 1.5K. Now, the reason why I'm choosing these different frequencies to boost at, as opposed to just picking one of them and boosting more, like suppose I chose 1.8 and just boosted a lot. For this particular track, that would bring too much focus to that specific area. If this were a heavier mix, that might actually work because then I can follow it up with a compressor and smash it, and that would actually focus the bass part more. However, here, in the verse of this song, doing that would just make it sound really tinny and irritating. So instead, especially since the strings on my bass were a little bit older than maybe they should have been when I recorded this song, I chose a broad range of frequencies in the mid to upper mid range that would help clarify it more. So let's listen to that. All the stars are gone. Yeah, you can really hear how this little do-do-do-do sticks out more. I want to even it out a little bit, so I'm going to use this compressor, also by Acustica Audio. And when you're using the Acustica plugins, you really want to make sure that you're feeding them the right level, the right average level. So to do that, I have my Doro meter by Waves set to -18, and that's going to put me right in the sweet spot for these Acustica plugins. Let's see how we're feeding the compressor. All the stars are gone, giving up the cash to bend the knee. That looks good to me. The peaks can go, you know, -6, -5. That's fine. So let's hear that compressor. I'm going to take down the level a little bit with a gain plugin after the compressor because I can't adjust it on the plugin itself. Sun shines through the wrinkled arms of the trees. It's sounding better, but it's fighting in that 200 hertz area. So I put another gold EQ after that and took down that area. I also boosted around 50 hertz and just did a little bit of high pass filtering at 27 hertz just to take off that extreme low end that I don't need. Sun shines through the wrinkled arms of the trees. All the stars are okay, so apart from volume automation, I think I'm pretty good with that. So to recap, we have the gold, which is the Neve, the pink, which is the API, boosting that mid to upper mid range. And then we're always watching our levels to make sure we're not hitting the plugins too hard. I have my compressor, and depending on which model compressor you use, 10 to 15 decibels of compression can be quite a lot. But for this one in particular, it doesn't sound bad at all. Then I'm just taking down the level a little bit, going into my last EQ, which is just taking down some of the muddy area, boosting some of the low end, and cutting out some extreme low end. So the verse and the pre-chorus being this part. Give me soul, I don't want to sing about anything bad. Those are processed pretty similarly, but there is some slight differences on the EQ, so that's why I split those two parts up. However, in the chorus, that's where things get a lot different. All right, so to start, I've got my gold EQ again, basically doing the same thing that I did in the verses. However, then I have an EQ plugin, just a straight digital EQ. Doesn't matter which one you use, I like the DMG Equilibrium. And this just has a single high pass filter engaged, clearing out the low frequencies below 200 hertz. And that would sound like garbage, but luckily we're adding all of that back. So as you can hear, that's doing something quite substantial. Here's with it out. Here's with it in. Then I have a meter plugin. Again, since I use a lot of analog emulation plugins, I want to make sure that I'm feeding them the proper level. And I just have a tape plugin after that. Rolling off all that low end made it sound a little tinny. I want to bring some of that analog flavor back to it. After that, we have our compressor, same one again, and then just a gain plugin after that because I can't take the output down on the compressor. The idiosyncrasies of hardware is often copied over into the plugin versions, even though they don't necessarily have to. So let's take a look at our low-end track, which is the Arturia Jupiter 8. And this is an emulation of the Roland Jupiter 8 from Arturia's V Collection 9. So pretty much everybody knows about Arturia at this point, but if you're just starting out, what's great about the V Collection is that it gives you access to 33 different emulations of analog and digital synthesizers from the past. That honestly most people could have only dreamed of owning back then. On top of that, they obviously take advantage of all of the modern features like advanced automation, recallability, and expanded parameter functionality. Plus, it's really cool to have access to all of these because honestly, I would not have thought to use a Jupiter emulation on this song, and I was just scrolling through all the different models in context with the rest of the song, and I landed on this one. So anyway, the low end of this synth really worked out well in context of the track. So the first plugin I have on it is the EQ plugin, which takes away everything above 200 hertz. And then keeping with the tradition of using the gold EQ, listening back in context to the song, I just made these EQ moves just to take out some of that 270 area. Most likely it was fighting with the guitars. Then this is pretty much the star of the show. This is called the Subbass Doctor, made by Sound Device Digital. And this plugin has been out for a while now, so any honeymoon period bias on my end is long gone. And I thought that this would be a good opportunity to talk about it just in case it never made it onto your radar, because it is a really useful tool. And just a bit of marketing, it was developed in conjunction with Grammy-nominated producer and songwriter Scoop DeVille, who has worked with Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, Kendrick Lamar, Drake, 50 Cent, etc. This is a completely independent review, so obviously I don't have to say that, but it's interesting to bring that up. Anyway, and more importantly, it has a nice and quick GPU-accelerated interface that is completely resizable. And given the names involved with it, you might be wondering why use it on a rock song? Well, even though this plugin is primarily aimed at EDM, hip-hop, and rap creators who want to make sure that they don't overcook their low end and blow out the speakers at a club or in somebody's car or something, this can be used with any style of music when you're working with sub-bass frequencies. You could get by on this plugin by just using this cure knob because it takes your signal and compares it to what an ideal sub signal should technically be. The more cure applied, the more your signal is matched to that of an ideal sub. Now, as most situations go, what works on paper isn't always going to translate to what sounds right in your song. So some testing out for yourself is definitely required. So then after you finish adjusting your cure knob, you can go over to this sub knob if need be and add back in some sub frequencies that would be considered healthy. You could hypothetically see this as a safety net for new producers and engineers, but it's also useful if you don't have a room with accurate enough monitoring to be able to make complete judgments in the low to sub-low end that will safely convert to many different playback systems. And honestly, the majority of home studios don't have accurate representation down there, so this is a very handy tool. So after the Subbass Doctor, I have an EQ with the analyzer engaged so that we can really see what it's doing. So let's start with the cure at 0. And actually, I had some saturation on it. Let's just take that off. This just adds a little bit of harmonic distortion. So this is pretty much what the plugin bypassed. Now I can see that there's energy even below 20 hertz that I don't really want. So let's just go ahead and turn that cure all the way up to 100 and see what happens. So you might need mixing headphones for this, but even using the cure knob, you can really hear that low end being cleared out, cleaned up. Again, with it out, with it in. So then I just evened it out a little bit with the Slate Digital FG Stress compressor. That's adding a nice little saturation to it as well, and obviously bumping up the volume quite a bit. So here's the 4-string bass with the synth bass together. Sounds pretty cool. And then here's with the context in the track. Try to give a little bit of lead in so you can really hear that low end just drop in.
Give me control, drop it from my mind with the weight of the world, yeah! Take away the bad stuff, never had a meaning before. Move it in the outside, in the air, I can hear my dreams coming home to roost. Well, I let them in. Oh, well, I let them in. Oh.
So yeah, the addition of the synthetic bass in the chorus allows access to those sub-frequencies that a 4-string electric bass might hit once in a while, but it's not going to cover it as consistently and accurately as the synthetic bass will. So the additional compressors, tape saturators, and EQs is pretty much icing on the cake, and the use of them and the frequencies chosen is going to be completely song dependent. But what's going to remain uniform across all of the songs that you use this technique on is going to be the addition of these EQs on the 4-string bass, cutting everything below 200 hertz, and on the synth bass, cutting everything above 200 hertz. Now, as far as all these drum tracks are concerned, I'm going to cover these in the next installment of the Creative Series, and I hope to see you there.